Legend has it that Old Nick himself dropped the Great Stone of Four Stones in its current position when he was constructing the bridge at Kirby Lonsdale. He did a lot of that sort of stuff around Lancashire, offloading boulders willy-nilly, chucking them off church roofs, kicking them over the neighbour's fence. It's a good job this is limestone country, otherwise it'd have had naught else to do. In geological journals, the Great Stone would be described as a glacial deposit, if anybody could be bothered describing it at all. Transported to its current location by the glaciers from somewhere else, probably Yorkshire, where it was unhappy, 10,000 years ago. Me and Jeannie McIntosh were going to have a picnic on the top of it, but Jeannie McIntosh couldn't get her Zimmer up the steps, so that was that. It had also been vandalised into near fretwork in parts over the centuries, and to be honest, it didn't look none too safe. The Big Stone, as they call it on the Yorkshire side of the boundary, because unlike us Lancastrians they have no concept of great, stands 18 feet tall and has 14 steps carved into it for reasons never explained. Nobody knows when these steps were carved, and to be honest, nobody cares. The other three of the alluded to four stones disappeared centuries ago. They probably ended up in some local rockery. Me and Jeannie McIntosh thought we'd go in search of any remains. The search didn't last long, we got distracted by the local place names. Just down the Slaidburn road from the Great Stone, for example, lies the amusingly named Moorcock, not to be confused with the even more amusingly named Moorcock Inn at Gisborne. Other amusing names in the area, if you're 13 years old, are Crutch Ember Fell, Merrybent Hill, Tosside, Wham, and of course, Cocklick End. No, I'm not making that up, even if it does sound like a setting for one of the later Carry On films. Also in the area is the Cross of Greet, aka the Toppeth Cross. Or rather it isn't. There's a cross base of sorts, a single hewn Norse one by the look of it, with a square hole bored into the top, but the cross itself has long since vanished. Old Nick's probably using it to prop up his bookcase. Similar to the Great Stone, the Cross of Greet, incidentally, according to the etymologists, is probably a corruption of the Scandinavian girl's name Greta, as in Garbo, marks the boundary between Lancashire and the unspeakable provinces of Yorkshire. Or rather, it did. Fortunately for the cross base, which probably also served as a plague stone once, although given the lack of inhabitants around these parts, God only knows for whom, the boundary was moved for the usual political reasons some decades ago. There's a bridge close by, unofficially known as the Cross of Greet Bridge, marked on maps as being of historical significance, although you could Google it until you're blue in the face and you wouldn't find out why. It's got an information board next to it which appears to be suffering from monkeypox. From said bridge you can see Stocks Reservoir, allegedly built in the 1920s to supply water to the Fylde coast. Well, when we say built, they actually constructed a dam and flooded the entire valley, including the village of Stocks-in-Bowland in Dalehead, along with its church, pub and school. Stocks-in-Bowland was first recorded as a hamlet back in 1245. It was a sort of place where they built the pub long before they built the church. In other words, a convivial village with its priorities sorted. In 1919, however, the Water Board bought up the entire village, having been purchasing it piecemeal for several years previous. The church, St James's if you're interested, was dismantled and rebuilt half a mile away. The inhabitants of the graveyard were moved along with it, so anybody who tells you that on summer nights they can still see the steeple of the church sticking up through the reservoir is talking through their hat. There's a mass grave in the new churchyard, somewhere. Why, we couldn't say. Presumably the records were not moved along with the church stones. Me and Jeannie McIntosh reached the village of Slaidburn, or, more importantly, the village pub, known as Heart to Bounty. It's been around since the 1300s, although most of the building nowadays dates from the 16th century. Back in the day, however, it was known as the Dog Inn. Another amusing name if you're a 13-year-old with a reasonable knowledge of sexual terminology. Because of the packs of hounds that used to congregate there before their aristocratic owners headed off to slaughter foxes for jollies under the pretense that they were helping out the farmers. At some point during the 1870s, according to the story at any rate, the village squire called at the inn for refreshments during one particular hunt. But the constant baying of the hounds ruined what was otherwise a pleasant drink. Above the din, apparently, he could hear his favourite hound, Bounty, making a particular racket, so he shouted, "Hark to Bounty!" At which point the landlord changed the name of the pub to accommodate. Which sounds like a load of old cobblers to me. John Lennon's origin story for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was more believable than that. It's more likely that the Hark to Bounty's name had something to do with contraband, to be honest. But like most of the history around these parts, the truth has fallen prey to folklore and spin doctoring. We're still on the borders in these parts. Historically, Slaidburn lay inside Yorkshire, but was rescued from its terrible fate in the late 14th century. Nowadays, it's proudly Lancastrian. During the medieval period, the village was the administrative centre for the Forest of Bowland. Not exactly exciting history, I know, but it might be of interest to somebody somewhere. St Andrew's Church in Slaidburn dates from the 15th century, with alterations made in the 17th. Amongst other historical goodies, it harbours a rood screen dating from the 1630s, a carved cross from the 16th century, and the war grave of a Duke of Wellington's regiment soldier dating from the First World War. Slaidburn also has a heritage centre which was unfortunately closed for the Jubilee when me and Jeannie McIntosh visited, where you can find the Angel Stone, an example of early Christian art dating from the Viking period, circa 900 AD. According to our information, the unusual boots worn by the angel have a tongue at the front and back. Only the carving from St Vigen's in Scotland shows similar footwear being worn by ecclesiastics. It's all very Zelda-esque. Have you had enough of this film yet? We have. Click like, subscribe, and join us again for the next thrilling instalment of Lancashire Footnotes as soon as we can be bothered making it.